Well, hello and welcome to the We Are Power webinar. We have got an amazing webinar this month. We're talking all about how do we shift from performative allyship to lasting impact. You know, we always like to pass on those top tips so that you can take action. If there's anything during today's webinar that you would like to comment on, please do drop a note either in any of the socials or in the comments. So whether you're watching live now, you're very welcome, or whether you're watching on catch up, then please do join in the conversation. I have got a great panel today. We've got a big topic. Probably many topics, but I know I've got the experience and I've got the wisdom around this table. And then I've got you three. No, I'm only kidding. To bring this conversation to life, because there's some really sort of stern stats out there. 42% of their employees say that their DEI efforts, I mean, are we even talking about DEI anymore? Because, you know, is it a taboo subject of efforts to feel performative is inconsistent. 30% of men consider themselves active allies in gender equality movement, yet male allyship is shown to significantly accelerate workplace change. When we set up Northern Power Women over 11 years ago now, it was always set up from all genders. It was always set up from that fact, because actually everyone needs to be part of the change, right? We need allyship all around. And men are 3.5 times more likely to die by suicide than women, and stigma around vulnerability remains a barrier in most workplace cultures. So we've got, as I said, some big topics to discuss today. So I'm going to hand over just to you to give us a quick intro, and then we're going to tackle into what we can do about this. So over to you, Amol.
Simone, thanks so much for having us on. My name's Amol Batra. I am the co-founder and chief partnerships officer of an organisation called North Coders Group, and I'm the MD as part of that group of our counter consultancy called Counter. And ultimately, I'm someone who's always ran challenger businesses. I've always wanted to run businesses that challenged either big business or the status quo, or to do things differently. And I guess in terms of this lasting impact piece, everything I've ever done in my kind of professional career has been from that, or how do we shift the narrative? And Counter, the latest kind of project of that, is kind of trying to shift the narrative on those traditional consultancies and their practices, and kind of shine a light on a new way of doing things. And by very nature of kind of what we've done at North Coders and Counter, it's always been diversity first organisation, because we believe that people from all walks of life need the chance to actually go and show that when they are kind of performing, when they are working in kind of really diverse teams, they get to more inventive, more kind of world-class solutions quicker than homogenous teams.
Thank you. Thanks, Amol. Marlon, welcome.
Thank you, Simone. I'm really happy to be here. So I'm Marlon Osborne. I am the Business Change and Readiness Director based at MAG Group, currently based at Stansted. For me, I really genuinely just invested in trying to help people. I have a purpose that I live by, which pretty much just says, I'm an enabler of opportunities. And I genuinely refer to my lived experience. I think lived experience is the superpower of most people. And that's what opens the doors to allow people to be their true selves. But it also is what allows us to be able to create a more inclusive environment for others. So in my normal role, I look at policies, procedures, what training needs to be done. But as in addition to that, I do quite a lot of sort of mentoring, going to schools, coaching. My upbringing has exposed me to things that allows me to channel and connect with people from different upbringings in a way that the typical person cannot. So I look at that as a way of leveraging and closing the gap between the corporate world and then some of those more social challenges environments.
Relatable role model, right?
Absolutely.
Thank you, Marlon. Daniel.
Hi.
Or Dan. Daniel or Dan today?
Yeah, Dan today. My name's Daniel Long. I work for Bank of America. Similar to Marlon, I'm lucky enough to have a role that allows me to create an environment for individuals to flourish. I think it's broad ranging for me. And within that Bank of America environment, we're able to really put that into practice. We can go out into the community, we can showcase what opportunities are available for people, and create an environment which is authentic, but give individuals the opportunity and coaching to flourish in their careers in reality.
And is that what meaningful allyship means to you? I'll ask each of you, actually.
Yeah, I think so. I think similar to Marlon, everyone's got a lived experience, and it's got to be authentic. And it's not one singular thing for most people, but there are certain themes and topics that are close to people's hearts, and you can use your influence throughout, whether that's professionally or personally, to create an environment that will give individuals opportunity to grow, but also spread that message even wider and have a ripple effect. But I think really importantly, it's not just words; it's kind of showcasing those actions on a daily basis
And celebrating those actions as well, actually. It's no point keeping them hidden, because I think if we showcase what we're doing and high five those, it will create that ripple effect, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's that positive reinforcement. So I guess just building on Dan's point, for me, meaningful allyship is around, well, first of all, listening to understand and understanding what the needs of those are at that time, but then looking at where those consistent opportunities to help and represent others who don't necessarily have their voices heard in certain environments. So I look at how I can do that. I can listen to people, whether it's frontline operational staff or stakeholders and partners, and when I'm in those situations, meetings or whatever, I can then represent them in the right way and make sure their voices are heard. But the most important thing is, I think, allyship is around doing things when they don't know that you're doing them. And it's actively doing that without being asked to do that, which means, one, you're invested, and secondly, you're demonstrating that you care, which is fundamentally why we do what we do, to try and help.
And that is the authenticity that it's done with then, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Because if you're speaking, championing that person when they're not in the room, that often is the key. That's the key treasure, I think, of advocacy and allyship, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And what that does is that those who hear you doing it, they then feed that back, and then others see the impact of that, and then you generate more advocacy for those outside of the room who will then buy into the fact that's what we're trying to do as a collective. Because individually you can't deliver everything, but as a collective we can make some meaningful change.
It is, and sometimes it's just the simple things, and it's the sum of all those parts that make the movement and make the change. What is it to you, Amor?
So I think if I go on that lived experience thing, so I only entered the tech industry 10 years ago. I spent 20 years in the music industry before that. And I remember pointedly going to my first Women in Tech event about 10 years ago. And I went into this room, and it was a brilliant event full of really intelligent women. And there was a lot of points being made. There were 3 men in the room, one on the panel, myself and one other guy. And this was the first time I'd heard about the women in tech movement, because I would only just entering the tech industry. And I really, coming from music, where I think can be seen as a little bit behind the times on topics like equity and diversity, and not in the music, because you've got your movements and they're talking about it in terms of the industry. So I come into tech and I was listening to this thing and I was like, that's amazing. I didn't think about that. Like one of the examples was, when you're putting your CV together as for a job, if you're a woman, you're only likely to apply if you hit all 10 must-haves, whereas if you're a man, you kind of blag it, and if you hit 6 or maybe 7, you'll put your application. Just stuff like that. It was all new to me. And then I realised that basically they were preaching to the converted. It was women kind of bigging up women so that they felt like strong about who they were. But more importantly, it was a vacuum, because the people that could make the change, that could actually go, oh, I get it. I can't be a woman. I can't be anything I'm not. But I also can't understand those people unless that light is shined on me. And so ever since that day, for me, it's been like, well, hang on a minute. We can't solve the problem just by that particular section of people who need that voice heard, or need them being bigged up in the wider society and those opportunities given. So over the last 10 years, everything that I've done in the tech space has been around creating opportunities for people, not because they need it most, but because they're good enough, and so they shouldn't be held back. And that's the biggest thing. It's like, well, it doesn't matter what colour you are, it doesn't matter what height you are, it doesn't matter, all of the things, age, disability, neurodiversity. It's like, well, if you're good enough to do a job, then all of that should just disappear into the background as far as I'm concerned. And that's what we've been trying to do, I've been trying to do.
And so we've talked about what we think it is to each of us. I always think from an allyship perspective, speaking as the only female on the panel, but I always think you don't need to be monogamous you don't have to, I'm only going to be an ally for this, I'm only going to be an ally for that. It depends where your lived experience comes from. But what strikes me from this conversation, only sort of a few minutes in, the use of the word opportunity. You've all said it at least once. Now, if it was as simple as that, how can we not create more of a multiplier effect? What are the blockers? And I'm not really about blockers. Well, I am about blockers because we need to get them out of the way because then we can do more. But if opportunity is the answer, create more opportunities, right?
So for me, it's, I've lived in metropolitans all my life, so London and Manchester essentially. Apart from a few years on a Japanese tropical island, but we won't go there. As much fun as that was. But ultimately, I've lived in diverse communities whereby you don't really think about whether someone needs an opportunity because it's already a melting pot on people who have the ability to do the stuff they want to. They get on and do it. I still can't believe you say it was 30% of men want to be allies. It should be 100% of men want to be allies. Do you know what I mean? It's like, it's logical that when you work together and when you take ideas from every corner of backgrounds, that actually you'll achieve more. By pushing against that, you'll achieve less. But there's too much intrinsic, too much intrinsic stuff that means that though the incumbents might lose by losing.
There's a great woman, Stacey Copeland. I don't know if you've come across Stacey. She's a boxer and former England player, actually, and someone who has paved the way for years. And she always says, I can't do my mad for it Manchester accent, so forgive me. But she always talks about it's not pie. It's not like cutting pie up and you're going to get less. It's not like that, right? Okay, there you go. Those who identify as women there, right? We'll do something over there for social impact, social mobility. We'll do something over here for. It's not like that. So how we talk about that? We just talked about the 30% as a leader in your business, Dan. How do you show up as an ally every day? Because you don't just have you're not just an ally on a Wednesday, are you?
I think it's got to be a personal mission. You're completely right. You can't do it disingenuously once a week. It doesn't work like that because people see through that immediately. It's got to be your own belief system. I think if I look back on how I came to where I am currently, I've had good role models, both personally and professionally. People who've introduced me to various different networks, and like you said, it's all walks of life. And then fundamentally, I think you want to do the right thing by people. And we were talking about opportunities, but it's giving them the confidence in themselves, and their own individual paths are all different, and it's creating space to listen to it and then take that feedback. But also, as Marlon was saying, it's championing behind the scenes. That's huge because it creates that ripple effect. It creates other people understanding that that's what you do by your people for no other reason than just trying to grow them and develop them and create that talent and seeing them flourish. But you've got to do that every day, because if you step off it once, that has a detrimental impact. That one day that you don't do the right thing, but you've actually created an environment where somebody can call you out, because nobody's perfect. Yeah. And creating that open environment where if you misstep, people feel confident enough to say that wasn't quite right in that environment or that way of doing things. And I think it grows from there.
Marlon, when you, in your intro, when you talked about behind the scenes and people, but your eyes lit when you talked about going into schools and showing up and being that ally there. Now, you can't do that every day.
No.
But you can still be that everyday ally. What is it that you take into that school? What's that lived experience that you take in?
Well, I mean, I referred to schools, but we also partner a number of other organisations, and other time I'm a white ribbon ambassador. So
Amazing.
So there's quite a lot of opportunities. So coming back to what some of the things we do is, so it's really important to understand individuals' lived experience. So when you build those connections with them, you're talking in a way that resonates with them, and you're not talking in a way that actually says we're trying to solve a problem that they don't have. So it's really more around, for me, actually going into an environment and then showcasing that everyone's got a choice. And you can choose to go one way or another, but also you don't know what you don't know. So from my perspective, I didn't know that a lot of the roles that we do ever existed when I came through the school system. So I want to talk about all of those other things that people aren't aware of, to show them a different perspective, which gives them more opportunities. So when we talk about more opportunities, the more you know, the more options you have. Many people, even in the environments that we work in today, the reason why they don't necessarily move is because they don't know they can. As soon as we open the door to say, these are the options, all of a sudden, they're excited about what that looks like. And they will say there's no opportunities, but the reason is because they don't know.
Can't see it,
Absolutely.
Can't be it, right?
Exactly. And so you can't necessarily, and it's similar to, people's career paths. If you don't see someone in those positions, you can't necessarily say that's the path I want to follow. They're the inspiration I want to use. So it's all about doing those things, a lot of things that Dan said, but doing it in a consistent way and advocating for those things. And what makes it easy is, if you have your purpose, you've got your principles, your morals, and you live by it rather than doing tasks, you just show up in the right way. And it just becomes the thing that you do and the thing that you're known for.
And it comes across. That's why I picked on that, because the minute you spoke about it, I saw your eyes lit up. It's where your heart goes, right?
And I mean, the same for me, really. So I was a long supporter, and then I have been on the board of an organisation you know very well. Started off as Liverpool Girl Geeks.
It did indeed. Our lovely Chelsea.
Chelsea and Joe at the time of Innovate Her. And, their mission was very much the same as what you can't be what you can't see. So they basically, their motto is getting girls ready for the tech industry, but crucially getting the tech industry ready for girls. And it swings both ways. Yes, lots of girls don't know that there's careers that they can go into because tech's always been seen as that male-driven, geeky industry. And so a lot of their work is actually showcasing what they can be in tech. But also there's loads of stuff in tech that goes on that is also a little bit too, not always creating the right environment for people from all genders and all backgrounds to come into. So they have very much taken it on a mission to make sure that the industry is clued up on, actually, you don't just get women in tech because you say you want women in tech or you offer salaries, or you might be going, well, I need more diverse teams. You have to make the environment so that it is inclusive once they get there. So it has to cut both ways. And, I'm a big believer in making sure that you don't just, it's not tokenism. It's like, well, actually, genuinely, here is a chance for you to flourish, whoever that person is. I'm not just talking about women in tech or not. And I think that's part of it, really. It's trying to be as inclusive to everything. We started doing some tech leaders lunch when we launched Counter last year. And I just said, look, we're doing it at lunchtime. We're not doing it in the evenings to create an accidental or boys club, because it's hard. We want everything we do at Counter is to try and do it so it's inclusive to our clients and our partners as well as our team members.
And we talk at this sessions all about, it's not about being performative, ticking a box, being seen, wearing the lanyard. It's about purpose. You talk about that. You've talked about purpose today. Leading with purpose and authenticity, Marlon. What is that in actuality? Because it's great to say I'm really purposeful, but what is... Because people watch, I've got purpose, I'm doing that, but there's something stopping them.
Yeah. And so if I talk about purpose, for me, is experiences that you've had that have defined the way that you are and how you've embodied that. So my lived experience has helped me to identify why I enjoy helping people, and I get energized by seeing the success of others. So with that, everything that I do, whether it be the coaching, whether it be the mentoring, whether it be the trying to remove the opportunity to people to say that they can't, all of those things that says, no, I'm going to make sure that if I can't do it, then I'm going to talk to Emil, or I'm going to talk to Dan, or I'm going to open up the doors for you to be able to get support that you need to be your best version of yourself in the future. And the authenticity comes in the way in which you do that. With every relationship that I've ever had, just like anything else, you get the return that you invest. So as long as you invest in that individual, they see that, they hear that you're listening, and sometimes it's saying nothing, just being the sounding board. But sometimes it's providing the solution or the help, the coaching, whatever that might be. And you do that consistently in a way that then says, I know what your purpose is without you telling me. I can see what you're about. So for me, in terms of the purpose and the authenticity and how you bring that to life, is doing the practical things that Emil and Dan spoke about, but also doing it in a consistent way without asking for permission to do it. Because you don't need anyone to say you can do it or you need to do it. You just do it. And that in itself will then help the individual that you're helping, give them the tools, the experience, the confidence to be able to help someone else. And then you lift them up as well. And eventually you get a really big network of people all helping each other. And that's where you then help the culture change.
And it's not addictive, but I think sometimes it's that ripple effect, isn't it? When you see the good, I can do that. And it's not too big and it's not too scary. I just got to do something.
Yeah, absolutely.
Dan, what was it, what or who was it that enabled, because we've used that word as well today, we've got some key words in it today, that enabled you from sort of being here to being a real active ally?
Yeah, I think it's a journey, as Emil and Marlon were saying. I think from my own personal perspective, you're aware of the people who helped you and were your allies as you were going through your career. But very specifically, from my point of view, it was joining certain networks. I know you know several of the people from Bank of America who are very passionate about their own networks. Going along to the Women in Tech and Ops events, just supporting at first, and then broadening that because you grow your network to going into schools and thinking, actually, I could probably do a little bit more here. And then that penny drops and you think, I can influence this a little bit more. And then you're going into organizations that help people from disadvantaged backgrounds who are really, really talented, And then once they come into that organization, that's not the end of it. It's okay. You've got unbelievable talent, but let's help you along with everybody else to accelerate your skills, your abilities, and like you said, it is slightly addictive as in terms of, and then you get plugged into wider networks, and it keeps just growing from there.
And what would you say to people will worry sometimes about getting it wrong, whether they're being an ally or an advocate or a champion, whichever, and sometimes language can get in the way, can't it? Oh, I don't want to say that. Can I say that? Is that okay to say that? So whether we're championing around mental health, whether we're championing about Black History Month, whether we're championing around allyship advocate, what would you say to people?
I mean, look, I'm going to be really honest. I get it wrong a lot. We all do. We're human, right? And the world's completely different from when I grew up in the 80s, when you could say things that you didn't realise you were being mean or being bad. It was just a different environment, and especially around mental health. You know, the phrases, and I'm not going to repeat any of them now, but the phrases you used to say to people, especially to men, that you just don't anymore. Because back then there just wasn't the awareness about how someone felt when you said those things, or actually, you know, you definitely couldn't have said it's okay to not be okay back then. Do you know what I mean? It's like, and so as a product of that generation coming into this, and then understanding what unconscious bias was, and understanding how the world was changing, and understanding how it is okay to not be okay. But you can't just switch off the stuff that you used to say back then. And I have to catch myself all the time. And I wasn't intending to be mean back then, and I wasn't mean back then. And as you grow up and you get on with it, and the world changes, and the world for the better, as opposed to the stuff I was talking about earlier on, then that's just how you evolve your brain. I think there's a lady called Amy Lynch who was Amy,
I know Amy
from ThoughtWorks, who I first encountered that phrase unconscious bias at one of her talks, and when what she said was, you're not responsible for your first thought. It's what you do with that thought that means something. And in that way, it's catching what you think and not airing that thing just in case it's a mistake or just in case it's whatever. And that for me was always a big lesson. I will make a mistake tomorrow, I'll make a mistake the day after, but we're human, we make mistakes, even unintended ones. But I think it's just sort of having the ability to step back in the moment and not say what just comes in your head because it's in your head.
And Marlon, Amal's just touched on mental health. It's often a taboo subject. So, and it can go unspoken about. Yet at the top of today's webinar, we talked about the dire stats around male suicide. Yeah. It's the highest. It's the highest in men. But how can leaders be advocates for that can help change this? Because it's an unseen pandemic.
Yeah, and it's difficult because I think the first thing that we all need to recognise is we're all human first. But then we all also, I'll be the first to say, I have challenges. I have, speak to the wife, and we have different conversations about recognising the impact of my behaviour on other people, amongst other things. Some of the things that I've learned practically, though, that's helped me to really understand both the responsibilities I have as an individual, but the benefit that has on others, is to reframe vulnerability from being a weakness to a strength. And with that, being able to talk about the challenges, to normalise that for people. Because, sadly, I've lost friends to suicide. And they are people who I've asked questions to. Are you okay? And they've said yes. Because we ask people if they're okay all the time. And that's been normalised to the extent that you're not really asking. You're just saying, are you okay? So now the question is there anything you need help with? It's reframing that, because now you have to think about that answer because it's different. What that then does is it then creates the opportunity to create those safe spaces. And then it puts people in a slightly different place where they then are more receptive to speak to you. And what I've found with that then is the difficult part is no longer asking for the help. The difficult part is then accepting the help. Yeah. There's still a lot more to do in that space, but there is a lot of things that organisations can do. But starting with creating those opportunities for people to be safe in those environments, to feel like people can speak, and once someone shares that, there'll be someone else who can benefit from the experience of that individual, potentially take the learning, and that could save lives in itself.
I think that's a really interesting point, and 100% is that normalised. Are you okay? That's not a question anymore. It's like saying hello, right? Yeah. But it's that what you do with that. But I think that reframing the vulnerability is a really interesting point. But then it's what you do with it. It's been, how do we get better at accepting the help? Because you've started that conversation, you've gone, oh, gulp, I've said it out loud. But how do we frame that to accept that help better? Is that who? It's a big part of a business to play in, small businesses to play in, communities, isn't there, to play in that? It's creating those safe spaces. Any examples that you've seen that really work well? Anyone?
So I mean, I've seen it work well where there has been, it starts off where lots of organisations have done listening sessions. That will only go so far because people will just provide the outputs and then no one necessarily sees the feedback and those sorts of things. But where I've seen it work really well is sort of individuals in smaller groups. Sessions have been set up, and people have been brave enough, led by someone who shared their previous experience, to create that environment. But then people will then talk about the truths. So what is the actual driver that is making you feel the way you are? It's not that you're angry. It's not that you're failing. It's not that you don't believe in yourself. There's something else that's sitting there. And once that is unpacked, actually the doors then open. And what you tend to find is the others in that smaller session will help. And as soon as they start helping, they feel value, which changes their frame of mind themselves. And effectively, you then have a working group of people who buddy up to help each other. Now, I've seen that happen successfully in a number of different places. It's quite labour intensive to set up, but if you save one life, then it's got to be worth it.
100%. What price the time? Yeah. And we talk about, Black History Month, Men's Mental Health, International Women's Day, Inclusion Week. There are days and weeks for everything, right? But how do we ensure that these conversations are not just for that day? Today is about how do we make sure there's a legacy in what we're doing. So Black History Month. We go back to the murder, the unlawful killing murder of George Floyd. And the world was in uproar. And organisations across the globe and individuals, communities, all taking action. And that slowly and then very fastly petered out. How do we make sure that we're not just remembering on one day, we're not jumping to something that happens that's so tragic? How do we make sure that this conversation, I said earlier before we started recording, amazing woman, Steph Adusi, she was on the podcast recently and she set up a movement a few years ago up in Newcastle, which is Black All Year. All year she's waiting for people, I'll come and speak. And also in October, there she is, fully booked, off you go, and want you to speak for free. Black All Year. How do we make sure that these days, these awareness days and campaigns are not just for...
I think it's calling it out and, I'm a Liverpool fan. Try and get to games as often as I can.
Oh, no.
But, the fact that this taking the knee thing before kickoff and they're going, actually doesn't mean anything anymore because everyone's desensitised to it. And then obviously the first game of the season, one of the Bournemouth players was supposedly reported that he was racially abused. And it's great that the referee stopped the game and the person was escorted out of the ground.
So he's an advocate, right? An ally?
So, no, but...
Call it out.
You have to call it out and you have to do something and you have to make a moment out of it. And that's good. Football should stop because it doesn't matter when that stuff's going on. The game should not be important. It's sorting it out. And I think more of that, really. I mean, for me, it's a travesty that it's happened at the ground of the team that I love and support. But I'm also glad that something was done in that occasion. And I think that, in a world where there's keyboard warriors and what happens on social media and all that stuff, actually all of this stuff, when you've got the ability to make an example and calling out something as wrong as that, then the bigger the occasion, the bigger the impact that has, for me, I'd say.
And has anyone ever had an occasion when they've had to speak up and it wasn't easy? Because sometimes we've talked about that was one of the things right at the start, being curious, listening, creating opportunities, but speaking up. How do you stay true to speak to power, if you like, and keep, even though it's difficult? Anyone ever had Marlon, you've had a situation?
I've had loads of situations, Simone. I think it's one of those things where you have to think about what happens if you don't. And it comes back to the purpose, right? And why I'm doing what I'm doing. And if I'm really being true to why I'm doing what I'm doing, then if I'm experienced, and I have done, my upbringing was being pulled over by police all the time, being told I'm this criminal or whatever it might be. The typical upbringing of a young guy in East London, right? That's my experience. So from my perspective, actually, it's if I don't address this now, how many more people are going to be subjected to the same behaviours? Or if I don't address this now, and I've got my young daughter, my young son, is she going to be exposed to this? Because this individual may leave, and think it's okay behavior. They might not even know that there's a problem with their behavior. They might be ignorant to the fact. They might not be malicious. I think most people make mistakes. They're not doing it on purpose. So actually, the important thing is the way in which you address it. Now, I've had circumstances where people have been inappropriate to women. So I've simply gone up there not to cause confrontation, but I've just gone and said, what's the time? Diffuse it. Are you okay? And then diffuse it from that perspective. And I've had people who have made comments, which I won't say, racial slurs, where I've just then said, okay, I took them to the side because I didn't want to embarrass them. But then I explained to them the consequences of their behaviours, etc., and then suggested that they might want to go back to kind of highlight the fact to everyone else in the room to make sure that everyone knew that they was aware of it and apologise, etc., etc. Both of which was challenging, but both of which was quite easy at the same time because it was a necessity to do. It was important that I did that, both because, for my own personal moral compass, but also thinking about who else could be subjected to that. And how many generations go beyond that. Now, coming back to Emil's point earlier with the previous question, my concern, and in the community, we have lots of conversations about why do we wait for something to happen across the water before people start talking, when depending on where you grew up, whether it's in Moss Side here or in Hackney or whatever, communities experience this all the time. Yeah. It actually hasn't stopped. So how do we then make sure the conversations continue and showcase the fact that this isn't a new thing? This is a continued thing, it's a continued problem. And one of the reasons why I try and do what I do is so I can raise that and make sure people are aware that actually you can't just do half the battle, Dan's point earlier. You need to consistently do it. You can't just say we've solved the problem. And some people say if we talk about it too much, that means there must be a problem. No, actually, we're talking about it because we want to get the right people together so we can understand what the problem is, so we can then find the solution for it.
And how do we create that, get more people on board, Dan? How do we create that ripple multiplier effect?
Yeah, I think,
irrespective of who and what you're being an ally for.
Yeah, I think networks play a big part, but you've got to pique people's interests. Everybody's got to lean to a cause that means something to them, or everybody's been impacted by an issue that in their wider friendship group or family, be that mental health, be that any other sort of cause. But it's giving people a confidence to take that first step. And I think leadership plays a big part, culture plays a big part. And if they see people doing it and taking actions, and then allowing them to feel comfortable to do the same, but introducing them to people that can help them take that next step, and then creating a culture where they can ask that first question. Because sometimes it's difficult for people. They don't want to misphrase a question, but giving them that safe environment so they can be inquisitive in a safe space.
You talk about policies as part of your role. How do we because big organisations, small organisations will all have policies and will all have directives and missions and values, etc. But how do we make sure that they're living and breathing?
Yeah, so I think that the way in which we shape and develop policies, I think where we engage with colleagues and we bring them in to help to provide the solution, we then create the advocacy and we create the ambition and the confidence that actually this is going to give us the outcome that we are all seeking, and collectively we can benefit from it. I think where policies don't work is where it's developed in isolation, where no one really knows what's happened. And then there's a perception, and an individual's perception is their reality, that actually we're being done to at that point, as opposed to actually this is going to help us all. So we are working with lots of people from across the organisation at different levels to try and make sure that we have policies that both reflect what our aspirations as an organisation is, but also reflects the needs and requirements of the individuals who perform in the roles. I think once we do that, actually we get to a place where it's a more effective policy. It's never going to be perfect for everyone because, different people have different needs. People have different challenges, and obviously some of those are going to not be, in line with what the policy says. but it will make sense. And generally speaking, as long as you've got policies and procedures that people can understand, then actually, there's no conflict there.
And I have to say, actually, so I've got, just sort of shifting the narrative a little bit, I've got a son who's on the spectrum. And Manchester Airport was the first place, and we're going back pre-COVID, where they have, the airport has a procedure, a way to help people with special needs get through the airport. And I think we're going back to 2000, and I'm going to go 18, where, went to the airport. It was the first time I'd seen the lanyard.
Yeah.
He was given a lanyard, so he would have been 4 or 5. And it just meant that anything that would have triggered him at that stage was just not a problem. And it was the first place where I'd ever seen that lanyard or understood what it meant. And obviously now it's a lot more common, especially since COVID, and there's a lot more awareness around it. But for me back then, for the airport to be doing something like that because let's face it, the airports serve every community, every type of person, every background. The fact that it was, as far as I'm concerned, that forward thinking probably goes all the way back to your policy point. And actually, you don't get more of a melting pot than an airport, right?
Yeah. And as like you rightly say, it's not just the internal colleagues, it's our partners.
Yeah.
So it's accessibility groups, it's others who are the ones who are really going to help us to get the right solution. And in many respects, that's how we can answer the challenging questions, because we know we've got the technical experts actually who've been working with, who can then provide that insight as well.
And this is how we answer the exam question about creating the lasting legacy. It's about small things. A lanyard for your son.
It completely is. And I think it's about showcasing stories. Everyone loves a story, right? And it's like, for me, just as my son was going through his diagnosis, and we were on cohort 2 at North Coders, so North Coders teaches people to code from all walks of life, and gets them into organisations as software engineers, data engineers, and been doing it for 10 years and sort of challenging that traditional route into technology. I think it was cohort 2 or cohort 3, there was a guy that was put on our course. It was actually the son of one of the CTOs that had recently hired some people from us. And we weren't told as a team that he was on the spectrum. I don't know if it was a thing or not, but he wouldn't pair program. And the social aspect of coding is really important to actually, you problem solve together. You don't problem solve with your headphones on in isolation. We're trying to change that perception. But he wouldn't. He just found it difficult. It's a 13-week course. And the last sort of 3 weeks of the course is all about a project phase that you do in a team. And so from this lad who was doing the course, doing well on the course, but wouldn't do the pair program, wouldn't do the social aspect. By week 9, I walked in one day and he was at the whiteboard with 2 teammates, talking them passionately through how to solve this problem. And then when it came to the group presentations at the end, he led on it. And a year later, I saw his dad, and he was like, and we've changed his life. North Coders has changed his life. And then he told me the story. He said, basically, he was a good kid, loads of problems at school. We did not know what to do with the school system, but the school system failed him, the college system failed him. And it was only North Coders where he found his passion, and he was allowed to develop and allowed to reach that point by himself. He wasn't pushed. And now he has a purpose in life. And it's like, we weren't trying to do anything. It was, I won't say accidental. It was just us being who we are that allowed him to thrive with this experience.
Being on purpose, isn't it?
And that's it. And that's how it's got, going back to an early word, it's got to be authentic. You can't try too hard in situations like that. You just have to do your behaviours in a way that supports as many different people.
People see through it. You're doing it for the glory, you're doing it for the photo opportunity or the LinkedIn post or whatever. I'm an advocate, I'm this, I'm an ally, I support this. But I often think it's often the small things, which we've covered. We've talked about, the listening, the speaking up, the creating opportunities. But anyone watching today, as we kind of come to the end of our webinar, is the small things. What are the small things that you've seen work or you would suggest to someone out there who thinks, I can't do this, I work within a big organisation or I work for a small organisation, what part have I got to play? It's someone else's job.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think for me, it's to take your first steps. Listen to the stories around you. I think that's really, don't be afraid to ask. Build that rapport. People are quite happy, or in general, like to tell their stories. So take that first step to ask about people, understand them, build rapport, listen, and then it kind of naturally builds from there. And then you'll find something that you're particularly passionate about. But start with, what's your purpose? But build and ask questions, I think, from my point of view.
I'll come to you.
I think it's always be learning, right? For me, I just think, showcasing people's stories, absolutely. Listen. I mean, I've learned something today in terms of Marlon's question. Not, are you okay? Is there anything I can do to help? It's always be listening and looking for those opportunities to either make your own life right, your behaviour better to these things or other people's. And I just think if you always know that you're never going to be the best at it because you'll be better at it tomorrow because you'll learn something new, then that, it's that humility to help others, I think, for me.
And I think for me, it's about being curious, because curiosity allows you to be more inquisitive in a way that you're invested in your care. But also, one thing that we haven't probably touched on is recognise, and you mentioned it earlier, do recognition. Where we see people doing it well, we'll positively reinforce and make sure they continue to do that. And it's a little thing that everyone can do, where we see those positive behaviours. Yeah, keep doing that. It's really good. That the impact of that is this. And if we do those little things, then, it will make that small change and incrementally build into something greater.
Always. And I think that storytelling, that recognition, we have our Northern Power Women Awards, and that is all about celebrating. Always been all genders, right from year 1 of the awards. We're going to year 10 next year, by the way, just putting it out there. But it is about telling that, and it's trying to translate it. You can't go and be Marlon or be Dan or be Amor because you're all your own people. You've all got your own learned experience. You've all got your ways to advocate and ally and be an ally. But we can all keep learning. I think that's really important. It's being open, that open vulnerability. That's I learned from me today. Don't think it's always big and bold. And I think one of the reasons we've tried to cover so much in this webinar today is because it's not designed to be and sit around an awareness day. It's designed to take the bits, whether you're listening now, whether you're listening in 6 months' time or watching in 6 months' time, take those bits but do something with it. Change that way you had that conversation. Just lean in a bit more and be bold, I think sometimes, isn't it? And ask the people, if you want to advocate, you want to be more of an advocate, but you're a bit scared, find the safe space. There's always a safe space. Because I think sometimes there's a fear, well, I don't want your help. I'm a woman. I can do it all on my own. I can most of the time, but not always, It's difficult all round to ask for help. But open a conversation and go, what can I do? Changing that narrative in the language, I think, is really key. So I think there's been learnings all around today, hasn't there? Without a shadow of a doubt. And I am really grateful for Marlon and Dan for coming in and being open. Creating the opportunities, I think, was really interesting how that was mentioned so many times in the start. We could all do that. We could all be generous. Sometimes that opportunity is just time. Should we have a walk and talk around the block? Should we just, have a little bit of a conversation about that? Because I don't believe you are okay. Or I think you are having a struggle with that. And how can I help with that? I think we can all do that. That's our superpower all round, isn't it? We can all give that gift of time. Because sometimes it can be the 4-letter word that's against us. But I think being that good ally is about that. So thank you so much for joining us today. Thank all of you for watching. Thank you for the comments that have been coming in. Please keep them coming because it's so important that this conversation is all year round. Whether you're watching this in 2 years' time, like I say, keep the conversation going, but do make that action, create that ripple effect, and be that amazing, authentic, but purposeful and authentic and vulnerable ally. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for the panel, and we'll see you next one.